And a lot of the work in the book is centered around, this new change operating system that helps companies address the total addressable audience. So, oftentimes as you're evaluating what's a good book, what's a bad book, and this is just for the audience at whole,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for literary agents, what makes a good book versus a not so good book opportunity?
Well, I think one of the things that, jumped out to me was that you were an expert in your field. You were both professionally and personally attached to the message that you were sharing. There were actionable steps that people, could take in order to understand the environment better, understand themselves better. You were presenting a problem that was, to me, easy to see. And then you were also presenting a solution, which was a route to just like a different experience of the marketplace that would be beneficial to everyone who chose to be involved. So I think for me, when I'm looking at a book project, when I'm deliberating about projects, I'm thinking about, is this in the current zeitgeist? Is this something that people want to read about? Is this something that people care about? Who is the person that is relaying this information? What is their expertise? And of course, like, what is their platform, right? So that's
Yeah.
always going to be, and that continues to grow in terms of importance in regards to like, how much are you out in the world, like, talking your talk and meeting people and all that. So those are definitely not all, but those are some of the things that I take into consideration just from a business point of view. And then on a personal level, like, I want to go and work with somebody. Agents pretty much work on spec, right? So like anything that I'm
What is
doing,
spec?
I'm not getting paid until you get paid. Like
Yeah.
I work on I work on the belief in the fact that who I'm working with and what this book is about is going to get us to the next level.
The big question: how quickly can brands and businesses change and modernize in response to the changing demographics globally? The future of work, demand for modernizing the practice of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and industry corrections. This is why we started the Change Podcast by Reframe, to help people leaders like you get answers that accelerate inclusive change and growth that reflects where the world is going. Get ready as we host a discussion with people leaders faced with the same challenges and modernize their approach to solving a decades-old problem. I'm your host, Jeffrey L. Bowman.
Episode 3, documenting the story about the change required. In this episode, I get the opportunity to interview my literary agent, JL Stermer, at Next Level Lit. And we get to discuss the journey of actually writing and publishing Reframe the Marketplace, the total market approach to the new majority. We explore the role of a literary agent, the intricacies of the book proposal process, and the evolution of the publishing industry. This conversation highlights the importance of chemistry between authors and agents, the need for diversity in the publishing industry, and the challenges of taking a book to market and launching it. We delve into the complexities of the publishing process and the importance of authorial control. Last, this is a reflective conversation about the lessons learned throughout my journey and her journey and the future. Join me. I'm excited to dig in and share more about JL. Our guest is JL Stermer. You were the person that took the first bet. JL, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself? What do you do? And we'll dive into an amazing conversation afterwards.
Yes, happy to. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I am a literary agent. My job is to be the kind of go-between between authors and publishing houses. I work with people on their book proposals or manuscripts, and I help them bring their finished product to book publishers. My job is to know editors and to know what they're looking for and to make, the best match I can possibly make as far as the content of the book along with the editor is looking for.
I think, we met many years ago, 2013, to be exact. And for those new to the book, Reframe the Marketplace, It was really a book about this tension that exists between folks in the marketing, communications, and advertising business, where you have this idea of what we call general market and multicultural marketing. My ambition as the author was to tell the story of the background of the industry. So you think about Mad Men, how that formed in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And along the way, there was huge inequity associated with the concept of general market and multicultural. Before we dive into the actual book, I'm sure you see, hundreds, if not thousands, of want to be or aspiring authors. What made you take the bet and want to take on the challenge of getting this in print into the world?
I think at the time, well, we met. I was introduced to you from the super connector, and you called her the super producer, Sidra Smith. Super producer, Sidra Smith. I met Sidra at a book event, and then a couple of weeks later, not long after, she gave me a call and said, JL, there's somebody who, a friend of mine, he's got an idea for a book. This is what he's doing. And she gave me a little overview of who you are and what you were doing. And it was kind of a no-brainer for me. First of all, Sidra's energy, I was like, you want me to meet somebody? Yes, let's go. It's not that, it's easy to say yes to her. And then I came uptown. We had some cocktails at a little cocktail lounge down in Harlem downstairs. And I remember talking with you and thinking that you go very deep, right? Like, what you're doing and you're very focused and you're very like I heard the words that you were saying. So even if I didn't understand what you were speaking about, I wasn't familiar with the world of advertising. I wasn't, I didn't know too much about the minutia of your industry. I knew I had been a recipient of advertising since, the time I could, read or look at, comprehend something. But there was something about what you were saying in terms of the marketplace that made sense to me. Like, I didn't always understand the words that you were saying, but what you were talking about in an overview, I was like, yes, like this makes sense to me. And why isn't this a thing? And I think that there was a naivete about me too, that was like, why do people need to be told this? Like, what, like, and that's, that was, working with you and being alive here in these times. It's always a journey of kind of learning what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah.
But it was very easy for me to say yes to you as well, as far as this, concept was concerned, because like, it just made sense. Like, yes, you want to, we can be a unified community and speaking to everybody instead of one segment. So that was definitely, it was an energy too, for sure. I was like, yeah, I feel this, dude. Like, I'm behind this.
So, I mean, let's just kind of set the context. I mean, when you think about this book, it was published in 2015 by Wiley, and now we're getting the 10 years later. And when you have aspiring authors approach you, in this case, you think about what was happening. There was a lot of enthusiasm with regards to the world changing, a lot of enthusiasm with the president, with Obama. And we had just come off of the 2010 census. And I had been at Ogilvy, since 2008. And a lot of the work in the book is centered around, this new change operating system that helps companies address the total addressable audience. And so, oftentimes as you're evaluating what's a good book, what's a bad book, and this is just for the audience at whole, for literary agents, what makes a good book versus a not so good book opportunity?
Well, I think one of the things that, jumped out to me was that you were an expert in your field. You were both professionally and personally attached to the message that you were sharing. There were actionable steps that people, could take in order to understand the environment better, understand themselves better. You were presenting a problem that was, to me, easy to see. And then you were also presenting a solution, which was a route to just like a different experience of the marketplace that would be beneficial to everyone who chose to be involved. So I think for me, when I'm looking for a book, when I'm looking at a book project, when I'm deliberating about projects, I'm thinking about, is this in the current zeitgeist? is this something that people want to read about? Is this something that people care about? Who is the person that is relaying this information? What is their expertise? And of course, like, what is their platform, right? So that's always going to be, and that continues to grow in terms of importance in regards to like, how much are you out in the world, like, talking your talk and meeting people and all that. So those are definitely not all, but those are some of the things that I take into consideration just from a business point of view. And then on a personal level, like, I want to go and work with somebody, agents pretty much work on spec, right? So like anything that I'm
What
doing,
is spec?
I'm not getting paid until you get paid. I work on the belief in the fact that who I'm working with and what this book is about is going to get us to the next level. No pun intended, pun intended. That's the name of my agency, Next Level Lit, right? I think that I always kind of felt like that, even before I had my own agency. But yeah, the platform is definitely a part.
Gotcha. The platform meaning how many books can you potentially sell?
Yes, and that is usually contingent upon how outward facing you are and how much engagement you have from your community, wherever that may be. I think that publishers these days really value social media. The goalposts kind of keep changing because nobody really knows. But I think that, it used to be the more, the better. But then it was kind of like, oh, it can be a gazillion people. But if they're not engaged and liking something is not the same as actually buying a book and synthesizing the information and making a change, right? It's very different. But the platform is who's listening to you? Who wants to hear what you have to say? Like who's clamoring to buy your book? That's where are they? Are they easily found?
Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to start here. The publishing industry has changed significantly.
Yes.
And I think a lot of that does have to do with social media. The way I see authors marketing the book, they come up with their own shows now in terms of YouTube, but then they actually have IG and LinkedIn, building that platform. I mean, when we were starting, it was barely touching and scratching the surface. And so one of the reasons I wanted to go back 10 years, like a revisionist history, and it's not to say give the book another opportunity, another read, but it really was tell the story about how our journey and the twist turns, because I think it's helpful for a lot of aspiring authors, but also from a publishing standpoint of how do you keep the story or the narrative in front of your audience. And so for this audience, specifically as it relates to Reframe the Marketplace, once we had the idea, we had the chemistry, you believed what the idea and the potential, and that was a tenuous point. What do we do next? Do you have the book proposal? Can you just kind of explain?
Sure. I feel like, and I was actually trying to remember prior to hopping on here with you, if we had somebody write the book work with you. Here's what I was thinking. And this kind of harkens back to when we first met and the first couple of conversations that we had, that I was like, I know he's talking about something important, but like, I have to be able to kind of like put it into not exactly layman's terms, because I know that I was going to be to make it accessible. I knew that the time I thought that the timing was right and that the content was appropriate. And if you needed some help making it, more accessible, as you say, then that's fine. That's part of what I was doing, was helping, people work with ghostwriters, co-writers, whatever it may be. So I think that for us, the next step was, I know that you and I had a lot of conversations about like, what exactly is this book? Like, who is this audience? Who is your intended audience? Where are they? And then, just laying out the basics of what you wanted the book to be. Like, you weren't figuring out what you wanted to write with the ghostwriter. You were already very clear about what your idea and what you wanted to share before bringing that person on board. So we work with the ghostwriter, and, I'm a part of that process too. I think I linked you up with someone, and then I look at different, iterations of the book proposal. And if someone is not a writer, it's helpful to work with someone else. Like, I have done that as an agent, but I've been very clear going forward. Like, I do not write proposals. I'll do a little piecemeal back and forth with somebody who is motivated. But, if it's clear that either, you were very busy and you weren't trying to learn how to write a book proposal, you just wanted to get it done. Right. And so that's also a part of the communication. So bringing in a third party who has written a bunch of proposals and knows
Right.
how to take what you're talking about and put it into the format that works for the publisher was great. So we went through that process. We went back and forth,
Yeah.
I'm sure, a handful of times until we felt like,
Yeah.
okay, this is ready. Like, let's go out and go on submission. And what I was doing at that time,
Before we
while you're
jump
working on the
there,
proposal, what's that?
before we jump there, I
Oh, yeah,
want to
go ahead.
I want to give a little color and context to, like,
Please.
that phase of the journey, because, for me, I was 100% reliant on your direction. And so once we got a good understanding there was a market, there was a there. And one could argue, like, we were way ahead of our time as it relates to this topic, as well as, the marketing communications industry, because it still took a little bit of time after 2015 before it really hit in terms of the awareness. And so when we got ready to write the book proposal, there was someone by the name of Barbara Lippert. Barbara and I met, I think, throughout the summer of 2013, maybe. 2013, and it was like a therapy session. And what I mean by that, they unpack everything in terms of your ideas. Writing a book, I think, is more personal than most authors think. And I think in the case of this, in terms of making it more accessible, meaning making me more accessible, not the actual subject more accessible.
Right. Yes.
And I think that was probably the biggest learning out of it, because for me, this topic was very near and dear to me in terms of the inequities associated with the practice of general marketing and advertising versus multicultural marketing. And a lot of it had to do with the history of, how America became, and then the history in terms of how companies hired, these providers of these services. And so we went through that. And the reality is that I felt like that with Barbara, one of the things that she was very good at, she had come from the industry, meaning that she was a journalist. She had been writing for Media Village and, a number of different other publications. So she had the journalistic piece. But for some reason, for me, there was another gentleman by the name of Jeremy Katz. The advantage that Jeremy had over Barbara was writing from outside in, meaning the industry, and trying to get into my brain.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Jeremy, he was the head of content before it was a thing at Ogilvy. He understood Ogilvy. He understood the industry. He understood my journey in terms of creating one of the industry's first culture practice, and what I had to go through in order to get that practice up and going while at Ogilvy. And so, we were about maybe 3/4 of the way through, and I had to tell Barbara, like, gosh, this is close, but, like, there's an element still missing. And it was hard for her to grasp, because she had not been on the inside with me at Ogilvy, whereas Jeremy, he knew every little detail. And so I made the pivot to Jeremy. And Jeremy actually became the ghostwriter, and he picked up where Barbara and I had left off. And Barbara and I had gotten to know each other in a very intimate way in terms of personal, and how to bring that into the book and the writing process. And so for a lot of, aspiring authors, it's like there's a subject piece, but people want to hear human stories, not a textbook of how much you know. And you're laughing because, that is not me, right?
Jeffrey is but it's so funny though, because you're like a warm, like we've known each other for years, and we've had so many conversations about so many things. And I do remember that was one of the things about the proposal, that it was like, I know this is Jeffrey, but also, like, where is Jeffrey? Where is Jeffrey in this?
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense in terms of what you're saying in regards to Barbara, because, like, right, she's going to be able to bring her perspective. And she was naturally curious. She was eager to be a part of the process for a variety of reasons, understandably so. But and I remember you kind of talking about Jeremy, like, mentioning him even early on in the process, and kind of keeping your tabs on whether or not he was going to become available. So I think that, having of precursor to working with Jeremy, and the idea of working with somebody where like you don't have to teach them something in order for because you have to teach it and then they have to process it and then they have to speak about it, intelligently with nuance and perspective. And that's really asking a lot of somebody. If a concept is new to them, like it's great that you want to know, and please do know, but also like maybe you shouldn't be speaking about it just yet because you need to like understand it a little bit more. And I think with Jeremy, like you said, he was with you. He knew who you were as a human being. He knew your process at Ogilvy. So I think that made sense. And I think it was good for you as an author to really, you felt comfortable with him because of his knowledge. And I think that came through in the text, in the book.
Yeah, no, and I wanted to share that perspective because I think, there is the subject matter and being the expert. But I think, the story thread through this is chemistry, meaning you and I, we connected. I'm sure you meet a lot of other inspiring authors where they have the subject matter, but can they connect from a chemistry standpoint? Choosing, your ghostwriter, should you choose to go that route, is the chemistry piece. So that's the art of writing a book versus just a science in terms of words on a paper. And I had to learn the art of writing for an audience that may not even know anything about marketing and advertising and communications, and that's through storytelling. And so these are all things that I had to learn before we even got to what we love to call, in terms of our jargon, frameworks. The 6 steps of how do you drive inclusive customer experience design. These were all new words and all new taxonomy, but it had to be simplified and made accessible. And that's what the exercise in itself of writing the book proposal does. So yeah, we made it through that. And then what came next? We love this phrase of going to market, right? Can you just explain what going to market is? Like after you got, the shiny, and I think it took me about 7 months to write the proposal in itself and get it polished. And by the way, you continue to polish it, even though quote unquote you finish. And so I handed it over to JL, and then you took it to market. What does that mean?
Sure. Taking something to market, bringing it out on submission, that process is where the agent takes this product, the book proposal or the manuscript, and they pitch it to editors at publishing houses as a prospective project for them to acquire. So at a publishing house, the editors are there to find and books based on what their responsibilities are at the publishing house, right? So there are different imprints. The way that I usually describe it is kind of like universities and colleges. It's kind of like the publishing house is the university, and then the imprints are the colleges. So they specialize in, in different kinds of books. So there are imprints that are business books, business books, health and wellness, romance novels, whatever your genre might be. There is an imprint that specializes in this type of content. They know the readership, they know, the editors are interested in this content. They have marketing and publicity teams who are, familiar with the audiences who are reading this book. So my job is to take the proposal and, we worked on a pitch letter. Part of what I do too is I'm going to hit up people who I know, that I've either worked with before, or I know what kind of content they're looking for. So for me, it's a combination of reaching out to people that I already know, and then also, reaching out to new editors. Like that's also a great way to meet people is, hi, like I have this great project, I feel like you would be a good match for it. So that process is me sending out emails and having conversations with people even prior to, like an agent who is, having coffees or lunches or in the mix with people. The conversation is always like, what are you working on? Like, what are you excited about? So I think that part of what, we like to do is plant the seed about what we're excited about, so that when it comes around again and the proposal is ready, the editor is like, oh, right, I had lunch with JL and she was telling me about, like, this is the thing she was telling me about. So, that's a little bit of the pre-process, then actually sending out the book proposal, and an editor says, yes, please, I would love to see this. I would love to, take a look at this content. This seems right up my alley. I think we had a pretty good initial response. And I think that that's what happens a lot. I think a lot of Editors, they want to see everything. They want to see
Yeah.
it. They want to make the decision as to whether or not, and I also think, depending on how many years you've been in the business, what agency are you working
Yeah.
at? There's a lot more agents now than there were 10 years ago. So I think that, if you're in a position where editors are saying, yes, I would love to see that, that's the first hurdle that you're jumping, right? Okay, good. You're not just
Right.
brushing it off and being like, yeah, this doesn't, like, I don't see this. And sometimes we do get that, right? Like someone's like, I don't see a market for this, or I'm not the right person to champion this. And there's like a whole bunch of reasons that people pass, and we never really know why someone is passing.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of different reasons, and we can get into that, a little bit if you want to.
Yeah.
But I think that our initial experience was that people were like, oh yeah, I'm down for this, because you had the expertise, what you're talking about. We were able to kind of like, talk about Ogilvy and brands that you were working with. Like, on paper, it was like, oh, you check all these boxes. And so I feel like we had a good, and I think that what happened to us was pretty typical in terms of lots of initial interest. Then people either, quickly
Gravitate.
or more slowly deciding that, it was or wasn't a good fit for them.
And I can,
Go ahead.
I can say, someone, new to the process, the reason you write the book proposal, it's, to give someone in perspective who's evaluating, hundreds, if not thousands of books a year, a complete stranger. And I think that at the end of the day, in terms of who we chose, in terms of, we chose Wiley, and partially because of, the brand is synonymous with nonfiction business authors.
Business books, right.
Business books. But more importantly, I think there are two things. If you're a first time author or looking to do to get published by a major versus self-publishing, which wasn't really an option back then like it is today, but people really want to know why you're writing this book. And I think for me, that was the theme in terms of this next phase of our journey. Why are you writing this book, and why you, in terms of telling the story? And I think the second piece was, how many books can you sell? That,
Right. Following up right after that is
how many books
can you sell? How many books can you sell? Who do you know? Who's going to big you up? Who's going to blurb you? Who's going to write the foreword? Who's going to, the business part of it, kicks in.
I
pretty
wasn't
quickly.
caught off guard, right? It's just
no,
like,
of course not.
That's the piece there. Now that I've gone through the process, and I like to say the hardest part about a book is not writing the book, it's selling the book. And I think for me, because of the companies I work with, someone sitting in the back room is like, you work at this company, that company, those are books potential. So that is the business part of get it going with a major publisher. And at the end of the day, the idea should be, to sell books. But part of it is, the dream, the romance, the art of like getting something that you worked on, your belief, and part of it's ego, right? Out into the world.
It's very vulnerable. Like you were saying earlier, like I think a lot of people don't, maybe underestimate. I've definitely worked with authors who, have written amazing books. And then when it was time to, be out in the world, like sometimes people are not necessarily like talking about processing, like they weren't necessarily right. Like they were ready to, write it down, but then, to do publicity and to be able to speak to, again, the business part of the idea.
Mm-hmm.
And you were definitely right. I think it's the combination of like what you were saying. It's those two things. Like you had the passion behind it, and then you were ready to do the execution. I want to say this because I was thinking about this yesterday. One of the reasons that when we were working on the book proposal, and one of the reasons that I wanted to work with you is that when I was understanding the concept in my head, I was like, publishing needs this. Like publishing needs this. I remember that we spoke about it, and there was some kind of idealistic part of me that was like, maybe we'll sell this book and people will be like, maybe we should implement this. Like, I knew that we needed it in the publishing industry, and what has transpired in the past 10 years and what is proliferating now shows that it is needed. You know, I think that was also one of the things, a little, I mean, a side thought, or I don't want to say it was the main driving thought, but it was definitely a side thought for me, that like somebody would feel inspired and a fire would be lit under them to make this process a reality in-house.
Change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you hit on that part in terms of understanding as someone, new coming into the industry. When you talk about, the publishing industry and the lack of diversity, is that fair to say?
Yes, for sure.
And it's not just a lack of diversity in terms of authors, but content. Given the work that we were proposing to do with Reframe the Marketplace, it was really about flipping the idea of minorities, where now minorities are the new majority. And so when you think about the lack of diversity, or the lack of diversity at that particular time within the publishing industry, how does that lead to, opportunity for the publishing industry as a whole? And we don't have to, go down the rabbit hole with it, but I
No,
just
no, no,
wanted to
it's
ask you
fine. I
that.
mean, I think, well, one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about, like, picking Wiley and picking the right partner and having the
Yeah.
chemistry, even sometimes, and this has happened to me multiple times, an editor is your first point of entry. As an agent with an author, what we're looking to do is find an editor who we can like also get super excited about what we're talking about, and somebody who's going to be able to champion the book, because your point person in a publishing house, like I'm the point person for the author in the beginning, and then we link up with the editor, and then the editor is our point person in the publishing house, helping us navigate all the different phases that we go through in terms of editing and marketing and publicity and sales, right. And they're our connective tissue. But what was happening then, and I think what continues to happen now to a certain extent, is that because of the lack of diversity in-house, not even just authors, I think authors were having more visibility in terms of diversity in authors. If everybody in-house, I mean, this is kind of to your point about Barbara Lippert, like if the people in-house don't really understand the content or the market or the audience, and then it's not working, and then they just say it doesn't work, but it's not a diverse team of people with diverse ideas about how to approach and sell, like you keep hitting against a wall. You're hitting your head against a wall, because it's just this self-fulfilling prophecy of like, well, we tried that and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Right. Well, who tried it? Who tried it? How did you try it? How many times did you try it? And there's not a lot of room for, if something doesn't take off, it's like next.
On to the next one.
There's so many people. So I think that, that's an important component. And I think that's something that, so you were asking me about how
in terms of the opportunity, and I'll give you a little bit more context to it too, because I think at the time when when we were trying to get the book sold, and we did, in terms of the Wiley, when we went through the process of even like the name of the book, right, and the cover of the book, and I'm a marketer.
My God.
That summer, I think it was the summer of 2014. If you're tracking with us, so JL and I met in like the spring of 13.
Okay,
spent the summer writing the proposal. We got it sold like the fall, winter, maybe even the spring. And then usually you get the books, signed in terms of a publisher, and then you have 12 months to write the book and get everything processed. And so I can remember we were either on spring break or about to go on spring break, and the Wiley was coming back, and not getting any names, with a bunch of changes to the cover, and I wanted so much of this to be the launching pad of Reframe, our consulting practice, which we eventually launched in 2015, April 2015, and the book was published in September of 2015. And I was being very flexible on a number of different things, but one of the things that I cover, the color, and the name, those are like my non-negotiables. And JL called me and was like, they want to change the cover or something, and I just lost it. And that was a moment where you begin to question, who's behind the curtain. Do they not get me? Do they not get? And I was like an artiste. You don't get my work, right? But at the end of the day, they're trying to meet a formula, right? In terms of what's going to sell, how's it going to show up on the shelf. And again, these were even pre-audiobook days, right? And so it really was about presenting the best look and feel on the bookshelf while at the same time entrusting your publishing partner that they're going to make the right decisions. And so that was one of the stumbling blocks that we had along the journey in terms of we've done everything and has been agile and flexible as possible, but these are the non-negotiables. Do you want to add any context to that in
Yeah,
terms
for
of?
sure. I mean, like I remember even having this conversation with you previously in regards to what the color. I don't know, did you use like Pantone swatches? Like, I mean, I know you were
Yeah,
very specific about like the font, the color, the spacing, the
yeah,
colon. Like
yeah.
there were particulars that you wanted. Oh, it's interesting. A lot of times in book publishing contracts, getting the author getting granted approval is quite rare. Usually the language in the contract says something like, the publisher has, the right to make final decisions, or there's consultation. They'll consult with you, but they have the right to make the final decision, or there's mutual appreciation. There's a variety of different terms that, we try to get into contracts. Of course, I always want everybody
Mm-hmm.
to have approval, but I know that's really hard to get. I'm guessing, and I don't remember what we got, but I don't think that I'm pretty sure we didn't get approval, but I kind of heard from you like that was a running, like this is important to me. This is important to me. And I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is important to him. And I remember, I remember having that conversation with you. And then I remember calling the editor back. And
Mm-hmm.
I very vividly, I had my office, I was, working
Yeah.
in an office on 57th Street. I was in the back corner of an office. And I remember closing my door, and I was just like pacing while I was talking to him, because I was like, I don't know how I'm going to explain this, but this is why it is imperative that you need, like, it is in conjunction. It is part of a whole. It is a part of this larger, this book is a
Right.
part of a larger thing. And also, you want books that are part of a larger thing. Like, what this is going to give you what you want. I just remember
Yeah.
like that was an intense conversation, because
Yeah.
I didn't want to come back to you and say, like, I didn't want to say no, because I knew how important it was. Now, you know, he did what he did on his end to get them to say yes. So I'm not going to say like, we
Yeah.
all did that together, right? You
Yeah.
explained to me, I did what I could, and then we got you what you wanted, right?
Right.
And
No,
so,
totally, totally. And
but I love that you brought that up, because I do
yeah.
remember that as one of those times where I was like, I
I
don't know how I'm
literally,
going
I
to do
was
this, but
driving to
like,
vacation. Literally was in a car headed. I think we were headed to Martha's Vineyard somewhere, and I had two young kids at the time, and I literally pulled on the side of the road. And I said, "Hey, wait a minute, I'm gonna take this call." I closed the door, and I said, non-negotiable. We're not changing this. And it was like, JL, I need you to solve this. And mainly because, and this is, I think it's important because I didn't understand this. At the end of the day, you're signing a publishing deal to sell books within that specific channel. Given the fact that I was an author who had come from, marketing, brand management, this book was about my industry. We typically do cross-channel integrated campaigns. And so if you think about medium or media specifically, a book is a form of media. And they're not concerned about what you're doing on the business side because, they're not going to sell books directly. There are indirect implications should you have what we call a halo effect, meaning that if I'm doing this email newsletter and I've got 100,000 subscribers, you literally have to articulate, okay, great, you got an email. Yeah, but we're going to place this book inside that email, and it's going to help us, sell more books. And so I think that was a learning for me in terms of truly understanding, with Wiley or within any other publisher, their number one goal is to sell books. What you have to help is great, but primary A and primary B is to sell books. And so I think that's the piece that I had to learn, that this isn't about integration, even though, in my world that usually helps sell more products. And so that was a learning for me. And I'm glad we held firm because it was basically the launching pad for Reframe Consulting. And so we'll move forward. Once we got past that, the book got a pub date, right? I think we set up some events around it. We had the launch event, and for the audience, what was happening to me personally, I was about to leave Ogilvy. And so if you've been tracking with this from 2013 to 2015, a lot of the work that we did at Ogilvy with Ogilvy Culture, that was, the agency within an agency that we formed, was really grounded in terms of this approach, change management approach that helps accelerate inclusive growth. And so as we looked to name the chapters, separate but equal, that spoke to this idea of, if you think about, Jeremy and I were very, very strategic in terms of the naming of the chapters. It talks about, the separation of general market and multicultural, but it's unequal, right? In terms of the investments. And then we got into each of the different steps: step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, and step 6. And that became our recommendation in terms of a playbook. But in each step, we present a case study in terms of how does this step happen? And think about that particular time period. We were challenging the norms of general market and multicultural to a total market industry vertical, and using these steps to build inclusive experiences at scale. And so, that's good, very innovative, but not very many people have heard of it. And so as I leave Ogilvy, March of 2015, April of 2015, Verizon was our first client, and we were still writing like the tail part of the book. And then Verizon agrees to like be included in the book as a case study. I'm like, oh, we got to go back and rewrite, because we had a deadline to meet, right? In terms of getting everything completed. And so I think we turned the book in, included Verizon, included the work that we had just done, in terms of the inclusive customer experience design. And then we launched the book. And what happened?
Well, I was going to say, I remember when you told me that you were leaving Ogilvy, I definitely was like, what? What? We were just like, we were riding that. Like, that was definitely one of the components, especially because if people didn't know who you were, like, there was that fantastic article in the New York Times of you and your team. Like, like that article, I sent that out, right? New York Times, color photo, amazing team, what your mission was. Like, that said it all to me.
Let's set it off.
And then you were like, by the way, I'm leaving. And I mean, it was, the ship had already left, the train had left the station,
right.
Like it was going to be okay. But I remember feeling like, I don't want to tell them that, because I think that was a large portion of what.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It ultimately wound up being fine. But so what happened after that?
Before we jump into that, and I give you a minute to think about it, because look, I think I said a couple things early on in terms of through lines, in terms of why you want to write a book.
Right? For sure. I ask people that all the time. Yes.
And I think that for me, it was about a 20-year lonely journey in some cases, where, you're being in the room and you're the only, right? And being in places and spaces that were not inclusive, and being, I was a first generation college graduate. So literally started on the back of a Pepsi truck. And I talk about this in the book. This whole notion of a DEI hire. Yeah, I was that dude. I'm him, right? DEI hire from Pepsi. It was a summer internship program. And I say that as a foundation, it's because I didn't really have the acumen from a business standpoint. And so my only entry point into the worlds that I would eventually go into was through reading. And I think some authors talk about this, is that reading a book is very personal, right? You're in front of it, you're flipping the pages, you're reading, you're highlighting. And so for me, my first book, and I really didn't start reading, and it's going to sound horrible, it was in my 20s, right? I've read maybe two books, The Scarlet Letter. For some reason, I remember that from high school. And then I read this book that lit me up as Reginald Lewis, So Why Do White Guys Have All the Fun? And it gave me access to a whole new world. Like, I can do that. And the things that they said, or he said in the book in itself, inspired me. And so I can remember interning at Procter & Gamble. I had just left Pepsi, went to Clark Atlanta. I'm a double HBCU, South Carolina State undergrad, and then Clark Atlanta. And I can remember being a little intimidated, right? Because, you had folks that had gone to, some blue chip schools, not that Clark wasn't, but being in those rooms and not really understanding what people were saying, right? But not saying like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Because a lot of the folks have been second and third generation graduates, maybe they sat at the coffee table or at dinner with their parents and talked about these things. I had to go read. So I went back to read around the marketing piece. Other than Philip Kotler with the principles of marketing, very few books talked about us, right? And I saw agencies come in, holding their bid portfolio kits and presenting for boards and stuff. And there really wasn't a lot of books that have been written around general market and multicultural for us and by us, right? And so for me, writing the book, yes, did I want to make the New York Times? Maybe in terms of best-selling, but it really was memorializing the work
Yes.
that I've been able to do and achieve at Ogilvy on that platform for the next generation. And there is a third option that you can choose now that reflects the total addressable audience that you didn't necessarily have. And so for me, writing the book, yes, it was about selling books, but it was more about launching the platform that you mentioned earlier, the business platform, and then having the book as a toolkit to use when talking to clients about this another option, which is inclusive customer experience design. And so, the book completed, we have a launch party, I've got Verizon, I've got Wyndham, I got Prudential, I've got United, and a lot of it had to do with the book, right? As you position yourself as a thought leader because of all the research and the packaging of the thinking in a book in itself as a medium. And so, we hit go. September, I have a conference to help launch the book. It was, the Total Market Conference. It was in Harlem. And what happened?
I remember that. That was really fun. I remember I sat all the way at the top because I wanted, there were like panels and did Sidra produce that?
Sidra produce that?
Sidra produced that?
It's in another episode. We're going to talk about that, unpack that as well.
I remember sitting there and being like, this is freaking cool. Like I love these conversations. I love what people are saying. Like this is an energy that feels good to me and I'm proud to be here. And like, who else can write a book in here? Like I was definitely feeling like that too. Right.
Yeah.
The potential for new ideas and the momentum, that was happening in the room at that time. It felt really hopeful and exciting to me, and it clicked and it made sense. And it wasn't boring. It was exciting, and it was speaking to, how the personal kind of affects the professional, and how, how everything is really kind of, integrated and what's needed, and hearing different people's points of view. And hearing everybody's kind of origin story, that too, like the whole idea of like you log it, like unpacking the Pepsis off the back of the truck and kind of like how you started. Like I love that. It's almost like you couldn't make up a better story. I know that you didn't make it up, but one of the things that I love about that is because as a human being, I really believe like everybody has the potential, and like what you're talking about in terms of creating an option, like making your way through and then writing about it and then laying out something for somebody to understand, like, oh, this is an opportunity, like this is an option. I very much believe in that. And we're all on our different paths, and we get different opportunities based on what our mindsets are and how we're kind of engaging whatever situation that we're in. So I think that, being a part of the process and coming to the summit, and, that was very invigorating. But when you're saying like what happened, I'm
So
like,
let
like
me so
lead me a little bit. What do you want to know?
let's do this, all right? You
What
know,
happened?
with every story, you have a beginning, middle, and end, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned before, with a book, it's a medium, no different than, moving film or film, right?
Telling a
That's a,
story.
telling a story. And having a book and launching a book it's not dissimilar than launching a movie, right? You have the weekend, you have a period, and then I call it the boom splat effect, right? We launch, and I'm not, is this a happy ending to the launch? I'd say melancholy, right?
Yeah, like
Was
I want to
it
know I want to know
melancholy?
where you're, yeah, I mean, I think,
So
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'll say it like this: underwhelming sales, right?
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Underwhelming, and we had the plan in place. We had the book proposal in place. We had an amazing journey, but I still think we were early to the idea of providing a solution that was alternative to traditional marketing and communications. And I think did did I do the best job in terms of getting the book out and making it more accessible? I think it was a little bit unrelenting in terms of changing the language or making the language more accessible. And I would go and speak at, I've probably had over 50 different speaking engagements now at universities and corporations. And part of what I think would have helped, not you, but me in terms of selling the book is it's audio, right? In terms of, having podcasts, we're nowhere near in terms of where they're at today because, when you're introducing a new concept or a new thing, title has to be, I think, bring you in terms of clickbait, right?
Mm-hmm,
In terms of what we
mm-hmm.
know as clickbait. And then you have to get as many people as possible to, I wouldn't say endorse, but also amplify, what the book is about. And this is like revisionist history, right? Now, that's one part. The second part I can remember when we were in market, now that everybody hopefully understands what go to market means. I can remember, I forget which one of the publishing houses, she said to me, Jeffrey, people write a book to tell a story, but the success of that story is that the book is still around 10 years later and it still is relevant. That's a successful book. And you remember that? Do you remember that?
I
And I thought it
do.
was so insightful.
I don't remember who said it, but I mean, obviously, I love that you're bringing that up right now. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's very relevant. I mean, I think part of the melancholy was like, yes, it had to do with sales, but also it had to do with the idea that like the general population, like it wasn't, people weren't ready. Some
Right.
people were ready, but other people weren't ready. And I think even as I've been on this journey with you, there's so
Mm-hmm.
many levels of personal readiness when it comes to, there's the business side of it, but then it's also like you got to rearrange your brain a little bit in order to be able to, you know,
Yeah.
be a part of the process and thinking about what that means to different individuals. Like, again, you know, I can be idealistic sometimes and I like that part of me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not trying to lose that part of me, but also if you get too idealistic, then like you also have to keep it real with yourself too, because I think that people were not, there is a problem. It does need to be solved. Here is a solution here, and all the things were lined up perfectly. I think that on the reception end, like you said, it was like we were very early. But I also think that this conversation, like the baseline of what this book is about, it just continues in a lot of iterations and a lot of industries and a lot of
Yeah.
like the grand idea of like humanity and dignity and seeing other
Mm-hmm.
people and like understanding the benefit of like diversity within a community and how that's just so much better for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think that has always spoken to me from the beginning of, our working together.
Yeah.
And we did everything that we could to kind of, get people excited and explain it in a bunch of different terms. And I hear what you're
Right.
saying about different, forms of media. I'm trying to remember, like, Audio, I can't remember off the top of my head why we didn't do audio immediately, because I know we've had subsequent conversations
Right,
about making that happen. But yes, I mean, what's you got to see something X number of times. Like you do have to have something drilled in your head. The reason that you think the way that you think is because something has been drilled into your head enough that you believe that that is true. So if you want to have some alternate way of thinking, you have to keep bringing it up, and you have to keep showing people. So I do think that, having it be solely in book form and not necessarily being able to discuss in podcasts, and having other platforms and other mediums of media to catch the person who is like, the audio makes them excited. Like they read a book and they're like, I can't read, but like say something, and then people get inspired, and then they're like, oh, now I have a reason to read this book. Jeffrey said something that really clicked to me, and now I feel like I can focus and I understand what the underlying theme is. Now I can read it and pay attention. I think that, that's cool. That's exciting, but we were not in a place where we were doing that at that time. That's for sure. But yeah, the sales.
Well,
sales were, I mean, it's hard though. I mean, if
mediocre.
if you want to,
mediocre, but that comes with it, right?
Yes. But also what I was happy for too, yes, that definitely comes with it. But I liked the idea that whatever you were doing, like you had your meetings and your conferences and wherever you were speaking, like you had it, right? Like you could hold it up. It was there. We could sell it. It was,
the frequency of it.
It was there. It was real.
So as we get ready to wrap up, here's the good news. The book still sells. I literally had someone email me recently, and it's like, this is a masterclass, right? Reframe as a business is still around. And we're working on the next iteration of Reframe the Workplace. And so for folks who may just be discovering Reframe the Marketplace, it still is relevant in terms of their approach to helping accelerate inclusive growth and change. And, the intent of revisiting the making of the book is to bring awareness of a solve or a solution to a decades-old problem that still exists. My challenge is for the reader and for the audience now on audio is, as you think about as a business owner, as a managing a brand or business, are you truly using the most effective way, scalable way to increase your business that is inclusive? When you bring more people into the mousetrap, you're more likely to sell that thing or that stuff.
That's where I'm at right now. Like I'm still, if I can still be amped after like 10 years and whatever, like I just know that what you're talking about, it just makes sense. It just makes sense on a very basic level. And it's like you have to jump through all these hoops, and you have to dismantle what everybody is already talking about and saying, this is how you understand it. Now, maybe you could, like, it's exhausting. And I know, that you've explained things to me a gazillion times too. Right. I mean, like, it's that process that is sometimes frustrating, but I do appreciate it because I know why I'm doing it, and I know why I'm here, and I'm proud to be a part of it. And thank you so much for having me. That went quickly.
Yeah, no,
I know we've talked about this for hours. We can talk forever.
We could talk forever
about such things.
For the audience, we thank you for listening. And if you haven't picked up a copy of the book or downloaded it on, you can go to jeffreylbowman.com to get the book. It's still available and still helping brands and businesses solve problems. Since 2015, we've had over 40 Fortune 500 customer engagements. And so really hope you get a chance to pick it up. We wanted to revisit it, given that it's been 10 years. And we thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.